one place that I kind of wanted to start is, in preparation for our conversation, I noticed that there is pretty soon, within a couple weeks, I think, an anniversary for you. On March 24th, 2006, you received your transmission, your Shiho, and
Yes.
and I was wondering if you've been reflecting on that in anticipation of this anniversary, or if now speaking about it, now it coming up, if there is something that comes up for you about, where you are now and when you had received transmission.
Well, embarrassingly, I'd never actually realised that this was the 20th anniversary until you said so. Um, God, 20 years. What's interesting, I think, about transmission is that we think of it in institutional terms. So we think of it in terms of a lineage, and a teaching tradition that goes from one person to another down through time. But I think a helpful way of thinking of um, transmission is to think of it in terms of freeing the student um, to to share themselves. Um, so not so, and I think that equates with my idea of what a teacher should be. So I don't think a teacher should be somebody that shares their wisdom. That's a guru or a charlatan. I think that a teacher is somebody who shares themselves. So they share so they're generous um, with how they are. So sharing what they know, sharing their idiocies, their frailties, their love, all of all of that. Um, and in terms of my teacher, so my teacher, um, Michael Luetchford, who, gosh, Mike's about 81 now, I think, and he's living in the Czech Republic. He's an English guy. Spent a long time in Japan and got transmission from Nishijima, who's the guy that's famous for writing Dogen Shobogenzo into modern Japanese. Um, and Mike was a mountaineer, and he got into Zen by accident. But when he got into it, he noticed that the spirit of it was just the same as mountaineer spirit. So you're trying to climb your way up a mountain. You're very focused on where you are, and he noticed that it was the same sense. Um, and on the face of it, he's a big guy, and he's like a tough guy, So so he and I have sometimes fallen out because he's been a bit too rough, with my students and so on. But he's very soft inside, um, and his way of teaching, I think, comes from a reactivity about the historical misuse of Japanese Zen. So you get this whole tradition of teaching that comes up in post-war Japan, which is kind of anti-idealist um, because of the misuse that Buddhism um, was what had as a sort of adjunct to Japanese imperialism. So you get these very dry as dust kind of teachings that are deliberately um, ordinary, um, and and so his teaching is very much about that. Very influenced um, by that Japanese approach, and so very um, unhigh-fluting um, approach, and that's from his background and history and from his nature. And my nature's different. Um, and and what I think is that isn't that we should replicate our teacher, but we should love our teacher by being ourselves. So it seems to me that he's kind of 1 foot and I'm the other foot, and we're just kind of walking through time. And so my successors then are different again from from me. So my approach will be quite. Um, I'll use language quite poetically. I'm very interested in recovering the Chinese heritage of Zen and trying to explain that in modern terms. My teacher isn't really that interested in any of that. Um, but also my development as a practitioner has twisted up my karma in some ways as well. So I was originally in the AZI, so I developed a kind of a sort of allergy to ritual, which has taken me a long time to unpick. Um, I probably overemphasized teaching at the expense of structure. And I can't really do anything about that. I mean, I can try and partly untangle myself from that, but my successors can address it. So one of my successors is a calligraphy guy. He's just setting up a Japanese school of calligraphy in Glasgow, um, and he's very very keen on ritual, and his take on it is completely free of that what I perceived as a quite fetishistic approach that some Zen practitioners in the West had. So I think, in a way, what a lineage is doing over time is getting entangles and getting untangled, and that's how it makes sense. And because once you've received transmission, that's it. Your teacher can't say, "Well, I'm untrans. I'm taking that away." You're completely free, so you can just be yourself. And so something which appears to be very traditional is also very is a creative act and is very freeing for the novice teacher who can gradually learn not to be the teacher but learn how to be himself, and not because he has to be the final article, but just he is part of a bridge carrying something very precious from the past to now to the future. Um, it's funny. Until you asked me that question, I never reflected on it at all. But it's so interesting too.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for sharing it because I really am very appreciative of, your willingness to share that, but also too just your way of your approach towards a teacher-student relationship and
Mm,
recognizing that transmission as a liberating quality, a liberation of just of being able to be truly who you are, because you're the receptacle of this transmission, and for you to carry it, you have to be you. And
yeah.
I feel like sometimes conceptually, maybe in my mind or maybe other people's minds, this idea of transmission, you've been shaped and formed into being a receptacle for that transmission, and therefore you might feel a pressure to copycat, or you might feel pressure to um, carry on the lineage of the personality of a teacher with you. So
Yes.
if your teacher's gruff, then I've got to be gruff, or this is how you make sure you get a student in line, or this is how this is actually what part of the Shobogenzo should be focused on the most, or things like that. But like
It, it,
what you've shared is something that is really wonderful in the sense that you can bring your full self then towards the that to your teaching and to how you introduce people to Zen or various other elements. Like I love that you're bringing in more of that Chinese, that Chan influence as well. And yeah, so thank you. And I don't mean to have caught you off guard just by asking you something that that hasn't quite come up yet, because I know that's in a few weeks away. But no, it was wonderful to hear that. And I was wondering for you, because I know that you had a background in law, and when did it start for you? When did this interest? Because I know you had a religious background prior and some things that made you allergic to ritual. But what made you start to get what introduced you to Buddhism in the first place?
it's a complete accident. I was very interested as a teenager in yoga, so I loved yoga. And through that, I came across this marvelous Turkish yoga teacher living in Glasgow, called Aysel Crockett. And through her, I learned all about mantras. Um, and I just loved it. And I was living in an apartment at the time, so I don't know what my neighbours were thinking. I would be getting up at 6:30 in the morning and working my way through the Sanskrit vowels and alphabet. Um, and But the problem with that, although I loved it and I could see a real richness to it, I couldn't accept the intellectual underpinnings of it. So the mantra tradition that I was in had this very Hindu perspective, which at the time, sort of, as a young adult, I just found faintly ludicrous. So I couldn't accept it as metaphorical, and I couldn't accept it as being literally true, and it was always a bit of a difficulty. So I had this funny dual thing of being quite a kind of intellectual guy, as a lawyer at the time, and also doing all this mantra stuff. And so I was kind of, in a way, caught in that contradiction. So I was aware that I had quite a strong spiritual drive. I don't like that word, and I suspect you don't either, but let's use it for the moment. But there was a tension between that spiritual drive and a kind of intellectual, skeptical, drive to understand the world. And I was in a skiing holiday um, when, gosh, I'd be about 26 or 27. So if you're Scottish, the Scottish hills are about 4 inches off the ground, and they're sheer ice. So it's torture to do skiing in Scotland unless you're very lucky. So we tend to go to Austria or Switzerland or places like that to ski because it's much more reliable. So I go off to the skiing holiday, and it's very sunny, like today. And I don't have a hat, and I get really sunburned on the top of my head, so I can't go out. I've got to stay in the chalet, and I haven't brought anything to read. So I ask around from my friends, has anybody got anything they can lend me? And bizarrely, one of the other lawyers has got with them Suzuki's Introductory Essays to Zen Buddhism. And so I'm just sitting in the house for a couple of days reading this, and I think this is incredible. This is reconciling what I thought were two irreconcilable drives that I had, and I don't really know what to do with it. But I'm very interested in Zen, and so I go back to Glasgow, and um, in a health food shop, I almost immediately see a big poster advertising an introduction to Zen in Edinburgh. It's not very clear to me why it's on a health food shop in Glasgow. I think, well, that's fantastic. So I go on to this introduction at the Salisbury Centre, which of course is right across the road from where you stayed when you were living in Edinburgh. And the and we there's this American woman there, Nancy Amphu, um, and her husband Jean Babi, who are disciples of Tyson Deshimaru, who set up the Azadai, and they're doing an introductory talk, and I'm asked to face the wall for 10 minutes. That's all, sort of 10 minutes. And as I'm facing the wall, I realise how difficult it is to do. I'm really resistant to it, and I think, well, if I can't face a wall, if I can't sit quietly and face a wall peaceably for 10 minutes, how free am I? And that's what caught me, I think. Sort of seeing my own confusion, my own agitation that was often suppressed under a kind of blanket of intellectualism. Um, but that got me. And they had a half day the next day, which I went to, which was on at a ridiculously early time. It's like 6 in the morning or something. So I make my way to the Salisbury Centre. I'd probably been drinking or something the night before, and I stumble into this room which is set up very formally. And this old, venerable-looking guy, who's Jean Babi, is standing there on one side of the altar. I'm sort of stumbling across trying to find a place. And the guy, who's an old guy, just forcibly pushes me. So I go the right way around the altar. So it makes no attempt to placate me or to explain to me. He just gives me a shove, and I have to go and sit. And I think that I value that. You know, he's not trying to sell anything. He's not trying to persuade me. And that was the start of it. And so what I'm doing then is that I'm going to this group in Edinburgh, which is set up um, by one of their students. So Nancy Amphu got cancer in the early 80s. When she went into remission from it, she left France with her husband Jean, came to live in Bristol, and they just identified everything, every place that there was somebody who had some connection with the AZI, and they set up a group. And then she went there every month to, to give an introduction and to hold the teaching position and so on. And she'd done that in Edinburgh because somebody from Edinburgh had attended the place in France, Le Jean Draunier. And so I went there for a year or 2 years. It was the Quaker Meeting House in Edinburgh. And the group didn't prosper. And the guy that set it up, John Livingston, who's a paediatrician, left for a job in Leeds. There was hardly any of us left. And so Nancy said to me, why don't you just move the Edinburgh group to Glasgow? You live in Glasgow, so why not move it to Glasgow? And that's what I did. And that was the origin of the group. So so the Glasgow Zen Group starts as a consequence of that in 1991, I think, 91 or something like that. And a couple of years after that, Nancy's cancer comes back and she died. But that's the origin. That's the origin of the group. So a long time ago. I mean, that's 34 years ago, 35 years ago. Yeah. So I'm quite a persist. I'm quite slow, but I'm quite persistent.
Sure.
When
I mean,
when
yeah, I think that there's a great deal of adventure in the story in the sense that like or just like this spontaneity in the story where by chance you find yourself having to hang out in the chalet during a ski trip and that being just you by yourself with a book kind of transformed and guided so much of your life since then. And
it's it's just incredible. I mean, it's just so. Say, for instance, if you'd given me another book, so he'd given me a book about. So when we were chatting before, you were saying, to have any exposure to any other schools of Buddhism, and the answer is, in any meaningful sense, not really. But say, for instance, he'd left some sort of compendium of Tibetan Buddhism, then I think I may have thought if I'd read the book carefully, oh, there's something which is equivalent to Zen there. Oh, there's something which has this sort of baroqueness of the mantra work that I was doing, but it explains it. I may well have gone into that. I mean, you just don't know, do you? But it's always everything's just like a sliding door moment, isn't it? You just go that way, and everything follows.
certainly, and and you're right. Like, yeah, had you been holed up with a different text entirely, or who knows where you would have been? And that's just like your engagement with a couple days, recovering, uh, just on your own. And then too, something that struck me from your story is this realization that you had doing basically your first zazen, right? Where you were first sitting in front of a wall, and that experience being something that uh, you learned about yourself that how free am I if I can't do this? And that's just a
Yeah.
really interesting phrasing for someone that is just brand new to the sitting um the sitting of Zazen, like the to show up for yourself and to sit in front of a wall, for you to already put into terms this sense of uh I feel like what came true for you is the sense of suffering, is the sense of samsara, is the sense of a dichotomy between where you're at and the sense of liberation or a raised awareness. And that seems like it was an awful lot, when you kind of like realize for maybe, I don't know if it was for the first time or if it's a gradual thing, but you realize that, oh, I am not free, and that's a pretty wild thing to think.
Well, totally. In that sense of, so it's not like, oh, the pain, but it's just like a sort of the spectrum of, in a way, lack of peace. That sort of agitation, reactivity, um, just this torrent of nonsense all the time. Um, yeah, it's. I think what was also um, interesting, and maybe it's because I'm a bit slow, that I didn't have an idea about what I would get from. So I didn't think, oh, my mind is really full. I must have something that will make my mind tranquil. Um, I guess I was kind of looking for instruction about that, about that, which was became an issue, but um, but I didn't have an assumption of what the meditation would be. But it just seemed obvious that that's what it was addressing. There was something fundamental about how we are, how we're socialized, where we're not at peace, um, and that's fundamental. You know.
Yeah. And just as you started to navigate, you were given this, but it's a beautiful story, by the way, just like this couple that came from France and from their various regular routine introductions to Buddhism, that they would have what seems like kind of in various places throughout the United Kingdom and Scotland
Yeah,
and maybe elsewhere. Um, the way that they would do that, I mean, I'm sure is still kind of vibrating and echoing out. So it's just amazing that two people can have that much of an impact. But then too, like you were given at a certain point to like the encouragement or maybe the permission to then take what was happening, the spirit of what was happening, and bring it to Glasgow. And I was just wondering, like, what for anybody that might be listening or just thinking about making their own group happen or starting something from the ground level. I was just wondering, like, how did you go about that? How did it feel to be introducing? Because I don't know how vibrant the Buddhist community is or was in Glasgow at the time, but like how you navigated that, how you decide how you uh, did all that without it doesn't seem like you had like a an official teaching position at that time. So I was just wondering like how you went about it.
so the way that I rationalized it to myself, at the time, would be that there were two phases to it. So where um, so Nancy died in '93. So prior to that, she'd be there every month. And I would just say, look, I'm holding this space for her, and so we're a peer group of meditators in Glasgow. She's the teacher, and she comes every month. When she died, Jean Babi, her husband, who was considerably older than her, would come a lot less, and would maybe be there every 3 or 4 months. But I could still justify it um, in the same way. But on reflection, I think because that visit from the teacher was much more attenuated. I think there was a way in which, without realizing it at the time, and actually without realizing it until you posed the question to me, that I think I would occupy more of a teaching position. But the way that I would do that would be I would look at Deshmar's writings, and I might quote some of his writings, or I might explain some of his. I think that would probably be where it would start. So it would just be taking text that I found helpful, um, reading that to the group, and then maybe interpreting, reflecting on that, and just sort of gradually um, tiptoeing into a sort of teaching position without realizing it. I didn't consider myself a teacher. I just considered myself somebody that was running a group. So I thought we were like a little community, a sort of fellowship of meditators. And when we became independent um, around the millennium, that's how we described ourselves, as a fellowship of practitioners practicing within the broad Soto Zen um, tradition. I think it would just gradually happened over time that I would think of myself more as a teacher. Um, and Mike saying that he wants to give me, I mean, it didn't occur to me to ask him for the Shiho. He said he wanted to give me the Shiho, and that helped, I think, my confidence in thinking, okay, I can do this. Because that's the thing, I don't need to be a teacher for you. You might not be a teacher for anybody, but it's an orientation. So it's to have that willingness to occupy that position,
Yeah.
and not think. And the other thing you realize over time is that people stay or people go. It's very, very little to do with you, and it's almost never to do with anything that you say. But it takes a long time to realize that, because you sort of think, oh, these people are here. I must kind of ensure that I don't disrupt their practice. But it's 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 mysterious why some people persist. The only people I know who don't persist is somebody who comes and says, "I've been looking for this all my life." You never see them again. but that's all.
Wow. Because they have an expectation that just can't, they couldn't possibly be met, kind of thing.
I don't know. I mean, enthusiasm is the Trojan horse of doubt, I think.
Wow. Oh
Um,
man. Yeah. Wow. I'll have to reflect on that. That's a beautifully said statement. Yeah. I am very grateful for you sharing those initial stages, because it clearly you were an example of a persistent person, and I think that it seems like the way that you did it, you had some kind of trickle of guidance as people couldn't continue to come to Glasgow to uh, serve as a teacher. As
hmm,
that kind of started to wind down, you kind of like, all right, well, I'm going to function in this capacity. For this time, I'm going to be someone that more or less coordinates, facilitates the way that this group
hmm.
works, and then you found your teacher, or your teacher found you, and just kind of organically you just found yourself receiving transmission, and then that being like, oh well, I guess I am someone that is in this lane to continue serving this community. And I think it's wonderful too what you said, just for anybody that is trying to start a group, whether it's Zen or otherwise, or any kind of like group within exploring this Buddhist path. I think it's wonderful that you mentioned that, like the the roster, or like the people that come, that can change, and don't take it personally should someone just stop coming, or all these
No,
influxes come
no.
in. Um,
I, yeah, I think our only responsibility, but it's a big responsibility, is not to waste people's time. And and I think the only way we waste people's time is by purporting to be something that we're not. Um, I think that's the worst thing that you can do. That somebody who just wants to set up a group that's completely sincere in that, that's honest about who they are to the extent we can be. That person won't go wrong. because then people can choose, okay, does this work for me? Um, is this so? Out of Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, I think Sangha is the most important, definitely the most important. And Dogen actually made Sangha into Buddha, like Sangha Buddha, well, practice Buddha. And you can see what he's on. You can see what he's on about. So I people that want to set up a group, you can do it really easily. You can do it in your house. You can just do it in your garage. But just be honest about your approach, and don't be part of capitalism. That's I think that's the danger for Buddhist groups. We're in such an ocean of self and of capitalist endeavor that we think of little groups that we're running. We think they're like corporations. So, oh, I've got 20 people. I'm twice as successful as when I had 10. It's not right. We should act out of love and generosity
I,
and truth.
yeah, and I feel like what you're saying too, just about like it's about the quality of the exchange. It's not about how many people uh you you have on that roster, because yeah, like you could have even just outside of any kind of Zen context, explicitly Zen context, if you're nice to somebody who's having a hard time getting off of a bus, you know, the amount of care that you did to do that is helpful for their life and your life to have that kind of exchange. Whereas if you're like, all right, well, my to serve is to help everybody get off the bus as efficiently as possible or whatever it is, that might not be something that you're just kind of checking boxes, as opposed to like really being there for that individual as they move their way down the steps or something like that.
Yeah.
And something that has come up, I think, a couple of times just thematically in our conversation is this sense of being who you are, an authentic sense of self. And I think that is a crucial experience that we all can journey ourselves into, should we be open to that journey. I think that is like a really fundamental and kind of exciting and sometimes really difficult part of life. And then that certainly seems to be the case, as far as I'm concerned, as part of like a Zen path, or like just pursuing this. And I wanted to talk about this like both within the Zen category, but also to your work within, being a somatic sex therapist and sex coach, because you have a wonderful website for, I'll go ahead and plug it now. It is loveandsexcoaching.co.uk. And it is your website that discusses and has articles and videos and newsletters and mini courses related to your work in that capacity. But something that from reading some of your articles and watching some of your videos, authenticity comes up quite a bit. And I was just wondering, like, if, how do you go about within maybe a Zen context, or even just with your work within somatic sex therapy, how does somebody meet that journey? How do they begin that journey, and what is so important about authenticity in both of those fields?
So authenticity is sort of funny. There was a guy on British television who was always very sincere, and there's a quote that's attributed to him which says, "Always be sincere, even when you don't mean it." Um, it is a brilliant quote, but I think it's sadly pertinent to where we are now. That that authenticity is often seen in a sort of performative way, um, and that I that dualism, I think, between the internal and the performative. So how do I need to be? Um, I think is a major cause of human unhappiness. Um, and very much with sexuality. So 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 people think of sexuality in terms of drives and appetites, I suppose. Drives, appetites, and actions. Um, and then they're not sure why they're unhappy. Why that doesn't satisfy them. And it's obvious in a way, that what we want is connection and love, to be seen, to appreciate another, to be appreciated. Um, but the problem is that when we think of sexuality, like say eating or something, you've got a hunger drive, so you've got a sex drive. And then when you've eaten, you're satisfied. But our sexuality, I don't think is an appetite. It's something which enlivens us and connects us to all these different aspects of our nature, our our ourself energetically, ourself emotionally, ourself in connective terms, ourself in terms of the imaginal realms. It just everything. It's making brighter the fabric of being. That's how it seems to me. It's not performance, and we're and so it's an odd thing that something which seems to me to be absolutely essential to our dignity and our beauty as human beings is trivialized into something banal. Um, and so porn and junk food and other things are just like, it's just the same as, somehow you're tricked into something which can never satisfy you. Not because your appetites are too big, but their appetites are too small. They all of us needs to be engaged and isn't. Um, it's literally a tragedy because a mis, you know, a tragedy I think is something that's avoidable. A tragedy is avoidable pain. A lot of life, getting old, getting ill, that's not avoidable. It's inevitable. Um, but us being unhappy sexually is literally tragic because our um, something in us isn't being met. Um, that approach, as you can understand, is not one that people say, "Oh, yeah, that makes total sense to me, John." That's a minority of people who want that because they want techniques. They want to know how to perform better because that's what they should be doing. But that idea of performance, particularly for men, um, is motivated by a huge amount of shame, um, which incidentally is why men find it quite difficult. In the heterosexual sense, men find it quite difficult to change their behaviour. Unusually, so if you turn up at work, and you haven't shaved and you're stinking and you're wearing soiled clothes and so on, your boss is going to say, you turn up like that again and you're getting fired. And so the next time you go in, you make sure things are okay. Something a guy's partner says, look, I'm not keen about this and this and this. The guy's really offended and won't change. Just affronted by sort of indulged in a sort of magical thinking. I want her to be different and me to stay exactly the same. And that's shame. Um, so bizarrely, I think our our sexuality and our spirituality, I don't see as distinct. But and this actually, so this is you lead me to these things that I haven't thought of before. But this comes to a fundamental point, I think, where just as sexuality is misunderstood, I think meditation is misunderstood. And meditation is misunderstood in the West because um, the the two parts to meditation, you could say as consciousness and embodiment. The embodiment part of it is forgotten about. And so we think meditation's about consciousness, and hence it's not very much to do with our vitality, our embodied joy. Um, but um, that's just an unfortunate accident. Because meditation comes to the West. A, we're very stiff, so nobody's sitting in lotus. Um, Nobody explains why we're sitting, why we take the posture that we do. And it's coming into a culture which thinks of spirituality as being consciousness. It's your relationship with God. It's not embodied practice particularly. Um, so if I so if I have if there's one thing which I would like people to take from any sort of encounter with me is that what I think is that missing part of um, of meditation, which is to do with embodiment, joy, vitality, um, and because that's a balancer for equanimity, peacefulness, tranquility, a sense of spaciousness that people will normally equate with meditation. But we need both, because otherwise we see Buddhism as being something essentially pessimistic, rather than being something which has its purpose of clearing the conceptual debris which stands in the way of our experiencing ourselves as we are. Um, and it's just that sliding doors thing we were talking about. It's just an accident, It's just an accident. So if meditation had been introduced just to people in yoga classes, and so people had to, and you were given a lot of explanation about why sitting posture is important, about activating the spine and the breath being correct and so on, then we'd be in a different position, but we're not.
Yeah. And thank you for going over like that relationship of the consciousness that cognitive processing of what meditation may or may not do for you, but also to just like intellectually, like how that might be broken down, and then also the emphasizing the importance of embodiment. And
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Like there's something about, and I'm gonna just kind of pitch something, but like to me, it feels like that in the American West and maybe elsewhere, uh, there is a discomfort generally with the body, unless you have a what is societally approved of body type
Yeah.
and that can get very specific of what's approved and what's attractive or whatever it is. There can be a lot of shame about body, and then American West, especially within like the white Christian like intellectual kind of movements that have come this way and have a
Mm-hmm.
foothold here in America. Like there's like a great intellectualization of the religiosity happens here and it has to be more or less rational, and if it's not, there's a reason, and there's a reason, so it's okay. Which I know doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but like it's very heady, and there's this like grossness in the body after all. And yet and I appreciate what you're saying, because I feel like if we just look at Buddhism through that intellectual brain activity lens, it can be kind of pessimistic, because it stays uh airy in your brain, as opposed to it being embodied. Like the joy of being in the moment is embodied, and then you're rooted, you're there, you know.
Exactly so.
Yeah. So thank you for that because it is an exercise just in facing how we've been conditioned, you know, in our various places in various ways. You know, wherever somebody is, they might have different uh, manifestations of this. But thank you for like kind of emphasizing both of those things. And I couldn't help but like kind of think about that performance element because like that headiness about showing up in a sexual engagement way, in the way that we think of sexuality as being just the act. I couldn't help but think about like the way an actor prepares for a show. If you're just thinking about the show and having all that pressure about hitting your lines, hitting your staged placements and the choreography perfectly, you're going to get really nervous. You're probably going to not do a you're not probably not going to be in the moment. But as if you approach the show or the performance or the acting as a collaborative effort, if you are good with yourself, so that way you can take on a character, you know, because you know where you are, and then you can take on somebody else's history and imagine that. You work with the script, you know, you really like delve into it and take your time. Then that'll feel more natural, feel more organic, that moment of performance. And then that performance badge of stamp of approval, you did a good job, extends to all that preparation and all that work that you've done before and after. So I hope that, you know, I'm not trying to talk too long on that, but I just like I couldn't help but think of that kind of the power of that extension, and that also applying to meditation too. Like meditation actually can start before you even walk into the Zendo as well.
Well, and also meditation can be a sort of performance as well. You know, you see people you're sitting like stone Buddhas. So it's very there's a very interesting if we pay careful attention, it seems to me we notice that two things are going on at the simultaneously with us. We have a somatic sense. It's what I'm feeling. This is what I'm sensing, and we have like a visual sense. So we've somehow. So if we think of the, some people sort of say, "Show me your left hand." People will do that. They'll look at the left hand and then show, or they'll create a picture of the left hand and show it. So the visual sense dominates over the somatic sense, and the visual sense is very connected with the mind. Um, and curiously, it's easy to disable because if you just blindfold a person, you actually really mute that visual sense because the eye doesn't make a distinction between seeing real objects and seeing imaginary objects. It's still the same. It's still looking. And so if that's disabled, then we can get much more into a somatic sense. I didn't learn all this stuff about embodiment from Buddhist teachers. I learned about it because I was a dancer, not a professional dancer, as you can as you can probably tell. But I just around about the same time as I got into Buddhism, again by complete accident, I got into dancing, and dancers are very interested in the sort of things that meditators are interested in. You know, how to be present, how to be whole, how not to be have your awareness being split off. And so they do lots of things that help that, like you mentioned. Um, so all kinds of performers will have ways in which they can be in that flow state. I can't, you know, some Hungarian guy, isn't it, with a very difficult name to remember, that invented this idea of what flow state was. But it's that notion that you're not separating things. You know, there's not a me separate from the world. There's just a flow, and you can see that around you all the time. You see it in top sportsmen constantly. You know, you see somebody, you know, in our football soccer games, you see somebody taking a penalty kick, and they're not sort of agitated, they're really relaxed. when they do it, and that's what distinguishes them. The guy that's really nervous would never have got in the team. Um, so so often what we're talking about, although it runs the risk of being expressed in quite difficult to understand language, and hence is thought of as being a quite difficult intellectual thing, is actually we encounter all the time in our lives, and somehow we don't notice it, because we think the world is intellectually constructed, even though it obviously isn't.
And there's so much that is by chance. And should you be relaxed and available, then those sliding doors, those you can kind of take those opportunities when they come, as opposed to being like, well, I'm not, I'm in my head, I'm not quite ready to take on such and such a thing, or I'm not quite ready for
Yeah.
this opportunity. No, that's wonderful, and I love to hear how dance informed your practice, because I've talked to some people that are dancers and also do Zen, and they talk about posture, and they talk about
Mm.
the active dance of Zazen, where there is this stillness, and yet you're embodying. There's a creative act in embodying and breathing and not being a stone Buddha. So
Mm.
it's wonderful to hear that you also have that expression. You found that as a route into embodiment. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I just have two questions for you. One that has to do with promotion, and then one that has to do with just more general advice. For promotion, I just wanted to offer a space for you to talk about anything that you would like to promote, whether it's a book or an organization or things that you've heard about other people doing that you'd like to get eyes and ears on. And just to kind of get that part going, I just wanted to bring up your professional website, loveandsexcoaching.co.uk, where there are articles, videos, and newsletters, as well as mini courses available.
Yeah.
And Also the Glasgow Zen Group, which the website is glasgowzengroup.com, and they have on the website there are details like sitting or meditation Zoom meetings,
Mm.
teachings, and opportunities to donate as well. And then there is a Instagram handle at Glasgow Zen Group. You can find more information, also just videos of yourself sharing teachings. But if there's anything
Yeah.
else
Yeah.
that you'd like to promote, please feel free.
Um, so, like lots of Buddhist groups, COVID made a difference to us. So before COVID comes along, we never think of anything other than sitting in person. COVID happens, and we realise that we need to we need to sit in person, but we can also sit in these other ways. So we have activities online. So we do like a really simple zazen every morning UK time for 40 minutes. People are very happy to, you're very welcome to participate in that. We've got a Tuesday evening that's online. Again, people are very welcome to participate in that. There's details on the website. Um, and we like the idea of people from from different parts of the world participating in our sangha. Not so they're participating exclusively with us, um, but just that might be interesting to have that perhaps in addition to your normal practice. Um, Gosh, I've forgotten your question. I'd forgotten your question because I wanted to tell you a story, um, and um, it was when you read out my somatic sex therapy site and the Zen site. I sort of thought that's probably the only person in the lineage that's got that combination. But in fact, I was laughing at it because I remember my teacher saying that he was the only man in the Zen lineage who his teacher had threatened with litigation twice. And I thought, you're my guy. And it's just, no, we did, I would love it if your practitioners, um, contacted us and maybe sat with us or had a conversation with me on Zoom. I'm really happy with all of that. Um, I mean, thank you so much for for mentioning my somatic sex work as well. Again, I don't work hugely on Zoom. I kind of prefer in-person stuff, but I do some Zoom work, and um, again, it's a lot of it is just it just depends on the sort of rapport that that can be there. But if anybody's interested in my perspective, which I do think is probably not mainstream, to put it mildly, then yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, and no, I think that you are definitely a resource within Zen, but also too. I mean, I think that the work that you're doing with your somatic sex therapy work is it to me it makes a whole lot of sense. And so like appreciating things that aren't necessarily that performance element and kind of getting away from that tragedy that we talked about, where people just really aren't being themselves, and that is workable. And you're also doing something similar with your Zen work, not necessarily you accept people for who they are, where they are, but you offer like an opportunity for people to 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 face that wall and to see who shows up and can they be who they are when they show up. So I think it really is wonderful stuff. And then two, I wanted to offer a place for you to offer any general advice to anybody who is walking the Buddhist path. And I'd like to frame the question as what kind of advice would you have wanted to have heard when you were first entering into the Buddhist path?
I think that what would have been really helpful for me would be um, to have somebody say, look, there's lots and lots of different practices, and there's lots and lots of different practices for a reason. You know, because there's lots and lots of different human natures, and the Chinese understood that very well. So the Tiantai school and other schools, originally the Zen school, had a variety of different ways to meditate, but partly for turf war reasons, um, um, Zen came to be completely equated with Zazen. Zazen's great for some people, for other people, not so much. And so you need to find something that makes sense to you intellectually, so you're not setting up some conflict, and and is easeful for you. And you need to find a group that is supportive. It doesn't need to be a big group, but you want to find a group which I think is warm, which can accept you as you are, which won't judge you or gaslight you if you're diverging from their idea of what practitioners should be like. Um, so so a practice that makes sense, a group that's supportive, and now because people have access to much more because of online facilities, we're not stuck with like so. For instance, one guy was in Glasgow and he moved to Madrid, and he went along to this group in Madrid, and just nobody would talk to him. Just nobody would talk to him. Just said, go there, do something, go away. And you'd sort of think, well, in the past, you just sort of think, well, I've either have to endure that or not practice. But now there's lots of options. Um, and I think we may be moving, historically, I think we may be moving to a situation where instead of having, as it were, these Buddhist corporations that are interested in your exclusive membership, um, we're looking at an interconnected network of practitioners, not because it's woo woo, and because teaching still occupies an important place in that, But teaching is then restored to its proper place, which is to share and to clarify rather than to impose and to create a hierarchy. So I'm actually very optimistic about the future of Buddhism in the West. It's early days. I mean, Buddhists got this idea about the degenerate age. You're supposed to have the golden age and then the bronze age and then the degenerate age, and Buddhism disappears for a long time. But I think if you look at the transmission of Buddhism from one culture to another, the degenerate age is when it's transmitted. So China takes about 500 years or so to move from to a position of integrating Buddhism. So prior to then, it either equates Buddhism with forms that they've got already from Taoism and so on, or it replicates the forms of Buddhism without really understanding it. And I think we're doing that in the West. So we're trying to incorporate Buddhism within a sort of psychological wellness model, because that makes sense to us. Um, and we can do that if we stay ignorant of the history of Zen, um, or we're replicating the forms of it. We're all wearing our kimonos and ringing bells and having incense and all the rest of it, all of which has its place, but it's not the Wizard of Oz. So I think so. It's early days for us, and all that we need to do is to resist that assimilation either into the dominant forms of our society or simply cultural replication. And then we can be just like a little splinter of wood in this vast bridge taking Buddhism from the past into the future. We don't need to be remembered, we just need to be useful.
John, thank you so much. That was very beautifully said thing, and thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I love this. I mean, there's so much that I want to react to because it was such a beautiful thing that you just said. But I love this idea of just, the acknowledgement of being a splinter in that bridge that connects things, and not necessarily working towards being remembered, but being of use. And you depending on how interested someone might be in their family history, it really is hard to remember your ancestors at a certain point. You're when you get into your great 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 great, and then it's kind of like, who was that person? For a lot of people, and but so remembered wise, name wise, and all that is it's hard to maintain. Not to say that it's not important, but were they useful? It's like, well, they allowed for this life, they allowed for this moment, and uh, I really loved how, if I may try to connect this, but I think that there is something reflective and resonant there, where there's something very beautiful about your uh, discussion of the Sangha as being manifesting in a way that meets this moment and is a part of this moment and isn't necessarily just replication, and it's not necessarily something that is uh, steeped and boggled in kind of like an over intellectualization either. And
Hmm.
uh, where it meets us where we're at, and it is expressed as people who are who they are. And I think that that kind of ties into that idea of Sangha, ties into that sense of the micro example of your what we talked about at the very beginning of this transmission, where it let you be you. There's this permission or this acknowledgement that you are yourself, and you are fully within your right to be a receptacle of transmission, and then to be part of that lineage. So there's just this beautiful, beautiful tie-in, I think, within that that understanding of Sangha, and that idea of acceptance, recognition, and honoring who someone is and the vast uniqueness that they are. And I can't help but think about like this quote that I believe is attributed to Thich Nhat Hanh, which is that the next Buddha that comes is the Sangha. And
Oh
I feel,
yes, I've not heard that quote, but that's fantastic. That's a fantastic quote.
yeah, yeah. Well, I hope I know I'm paraphrasing, and I hope that I'm saying it right. But like, there's, I think that,
Well, whether it's his or not, it's fantastic.
yeah. So yeah, I hope I do honor to it. But yeah, I agree that there's something very beautiful about. this unity that comes together, or this recognition of each other as people on the path, however, in whatever way it is. But
Hmm.
thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, and for sharing your story. And
A real pleasure. Thank you.
I just want to highlight again that you can see a lot of the teachings on the Instagram at Glasgow Zen Group, and yeah,
Oh,
then
Vincent, there's also a
yeah.
ton of the teachings on the website, but they're a bit obscure. So if you look at the Bar Zen teachings and then you go into Kuzen, there's like there's like a book's worth of material there. So there's loads of stuff. So there's lots of video material on Instagram, but there's lots of um, slightly more reflective written material on the website. There's tons of it.
Yes.
Um,
Well, and I wanted to mention too, just on that on the website, the glasgowzengroup.com, there's the Kusen, and there's also this a really it's a really helpful website for a lot of reasons, but it has like the chant books, and it has the various things like how basically you operate available there too. So thank you for making those resources available. But thank you again for sharing your story.
Thank you, Vince. It's been really nice talking to you, and it's great to get questions that prompt me to like think things I've never thought of before. So, um, brilliant. Thank you very much.